Welcome to From the Hawkra, a Seattle Seahawks podcast. You can find it on the Bleav network. Of course, you can find it on YouTube at the Seahawkers podcast as well. We put all the videos out there. I am Clinton Bonner. We are fired up today to talk Seahawks. It was day one where the pads were on today at practice, and I am joined by two great co-hosts. We're talking about ceilings, floors. We're talking about a recent Softy interview. We're talking about lots of different things. Mr. Adam, how you doing today, dude? How's it feel to have the pads on? How'd it feel for you?
Dude, I'm jacked up. Like I said on the pod the other day, that hasn't been released, so none of you would know. I am so fired up about training camp and all this. Like, it's time for football. The pads are on. We're starting to see, some of the early results of the new coaching, and I think that's exciting. I'm sure there's no way Phil is not fired up. He's probably more fired up than I am.
I'm pretty fired up. Got back from a 20th anniversary trip with my wife up in Vancouver. There's some, actually Victoria, Vancouver Island. There's some Seahawks fans up there as well, of course.
Sure.
And it was a good time. It was beautiful weather, great time with my wife. Got back to SeaTac Airport. Apparently not my favorite place because we got stuck there for a while. I ended up getting kind of sick, but I'm recovered and ready to talk Seahawks football. Adam, you kind of got me thinking going on our text chain. You sent a little clip from Softy interviewing Ryan Grubb, and we know you have some powerful thoughts, if not I should say passionate thoughts about what you heard. I just got the sense as you sent that. What was your take, Adam, as you got to listen to Mr. Grubb talk about his offense a little bit to Softy?
Yeah, glad you brought it up because it's going to have an impact on our discussion of ceilings and floors for four different offensive players here. And so hang on for that. If you're looking for that content, it's going to be really great. But this interview, I do think helps shape maybe some of those predictions. And look, of all the people in Seahawks, Podiverse and all that, when Grubb was hired, I was probably the least excited of everybody.
Sure. Yep.
And probably because I'm not a Husky guy. Like, I'm not a college football guy really at all, but I live in Montana. I really don't give a crap about the Huskies. I mean, that's great. I'm glad other people do, just not for me. So hometown guy, come to the hometown team. After a very successful year, people were super fired up. I have extreme reservations in when we first started talking about him coming into the league. It was the idea of, well, how many of these dudes that have come just straight from college have been a success? And, I went through it over a couple other shows, and basically you look at the guys that came in as a coordinator or a head coach without even a cup of coffee of experience in the NFL. They've been abject failures, including the greatest college football coach of all time in Nick Saban. Abject failure. There's been one dude to make it happen. It was Jimmy Johnson back in the 90s. So this is not something that people seem to overcome very often, and it's usually trying to bring a brand of college football to the league that just doesn't get it done. And
yeah,
I think that's what we're kind of seeing with this interview, guys. I wasn't excited about the answers that I heard because everybody was telling me, no, it won't be like Washington. It's going to be a lot more running the football than that. It's going to be physical. That's what, and Grubb gave some lip service to that and some of his earlier pressers throughout the year. I don't know if your guys' perspective on that changed after listening to the interview, or if you're thinking that, oh yeah, no, it's going to be just like South Dakota State 40 years ago when he was at, Sioux Falls or wherever the hell it was.
Well, Mr. Phil, what do you think? I mean, so he's on KJR with Softy. It's a pretty lengthy interview, and they know each other quite well. So, yeah. And it seemed a very honest interview, a very, very honest, Grubb we got there. And what were your takeaways?
I had a few takeaways. I think he's very confident, as Adam has said. He knows, in his mind, he knows what to do. He knows how to handle this NFL that he's stepping into. He's ready for his moment. Softy says you've been ready for a long time. Glad you got your chance. And he didn't discount that. I think he talked about how tough the NFL defenses are. And basically what I kept hearing is the things that the NFL is stopping, he knows how to execute it better. And the big example that he took was he talked about how everybody's taking away the boundary, everybody was taking away the deep pass. And then he proceeded to say, we know how to do that, and we're going to do it, and we're going to show people how it's done. Pretty much talked about the receivers that we have, which I'm all excited about. I think some of the physical was with DK Metcalf. He's going to use DK as a very physical player. The weird thing was when he talked about K9, he talked about his hands, which I know he has good hands. He talked about his shiftiness, eluding tacklers. I was excited about that, but then he went right into using him in the passing game for protection and catching the ball. So maybe the only over-the-middle passes we're going to get are to K9. I don't know. I'm sure we didn't get everything that Grubb's going to do from that one interview, but I definitely didn't feel like he's going to do things a lot different than he did them at Washington. That wasn't coming through this time.
Yeah. So Adam, what else was there for you? Did Phil capture it all, or were there any other breadcrumbs or nuggets that made you just go, this sounds a lot like you're going to try and do what you did at UW, which the college game is very, very different player level. The actual dimensions with the hash marks are quite different. So the boundaries gigantic to one side versus the other, different game. So any other pieces that stood out for you?
Yeah, Phil bringing up the idea that he was saying, yeah, they take away the outside the numbers and the deep pass, but we're going to do it because it's the hardest throws in football. And when you do that, it unlocks everything else. And it's like, why in the world are we trying to make the bread and butter of our offense the hardest thing to do in football? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. That just, maybe it does to him. Maybe it'll work great. Maybe I'm dead wrong. There's an absolute possibility that happens. But that was difficult to hear. The other thing was asking about, hey, what's a Ryan Grubb offense and that sort of thing. He was talking about, well, our best offenses is when we have 3 elite receivers. So already talking about how the first players out of his mouth, receivers. That means you're looking to throw the football a heck of a lot more. Other thing that he said something about staying ahead of the sticks. And within that, it's not just, running the football and losing a couple of yards, like, and having to overcome that. Like, you got to stay ahead of the sticks with the passing game. Basically, it was like, wait a second. Every time you run the football, you don't just lose yards and get behind the sticks. Like, that's not how it works. And then thirdly, Phil hit on it, just the idea that talking about K9, he talks about him in space and being one of the guys that really makes the most missed tackles out in space in the entire league. And to me, that sounded a lot like, hey, combined with what he was saying about his hands, way better pass catcher than anybody really thinks, that he wants to get K9 in space that way rather than handing off the rock and being a physical football team. And that all that combined, like, it scares me, man. Like, that sort of college air it out type offense has never, ever worked in the league. Never. It's never worked. It will for a short period of time. Like Chip Kelly's offense went really well for the first 8-9 weeks. I have a feeling that this offense is going to look really good the first part of the year. It's what I want to see, going down the stretch when people have time to adjust and all of that and see this new concept. We'll see how it looks after that. I have low expectations. Let's just put it that way. I do like that, he's talking about how confident he is in it and that none of this scares him and he's ready to rock. So I'm excited about that, I guess. But he keeps saying, throwing in the word physical in with his offense. But boys, at the end of the day, have you ever in your life seen a pass-happy football team that was physical, offensively speaking? Have you ever seen it?
Not really. If physical and aggressive are two different things, right? Aggressive, pushing it downfield, and you could equate those things, but they're not the same. Physical is 3rd and 2, and you have no doubt how you're going to convert that, right? And we haven't had that in a number of years. And this offense and how it's being portrayed so far by the general of it, Grubb, doesn't speak physicality to me. It speaks space. It speaks quickness from your linemen, getting out in space, creating space, and overtly going to your most talented people over and over and over again. So, which that part I like a lot. That part I dig. But if you compare to McVay or Shanahan, they do that. They go to their main dudes over and over and over again. They're overweight going to their top guys. They also run the crap out of the ball. It's just that's it. They bring in a guy like Kyron Williams, and Kyron Williams smokes the league, right? And then they go improve the offensive line in the offseason in the case of the Rams. So, but it sets the stage. We're going to talk about ceiling versus floor for 4 unique Seahawks today. Boys, before we get into the very, very first one, I have one question. I'll start with you, Mr. Phil. Mr. Phil, did you see this magic today out at the VMAC? Did you on screen laying out there Superman style, Jake Bobo? Mr. Phil, is it the first time you're seeing this? Do you think it's AI or did you see the video?
I read about it, and that's all that I did. I read about it. I did not get to see the video. This is the first time I'm seeing the picture. Fantastic, of course. Of course, Jake Bobo, an athletic marvel. The things he can do at the speed at which he does them, it's amazing. He's incredible. We all love him because he makes us feel like anybody can do things when we have the magic somewhere inside.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're listening on the Bleav network on the For the Hawkra podcast, great, but a good reason to head over to youtube.com/Seahawkers podcast to check out this still shot and go check out that video. Adam, did you see the video at all today, or is this the first time you're seeing this flash?
First time I'm seeing it. Heard Tyler Lockett talk about it in his presser. Top 5 training camp catch he's ever seen.
It's amazing.
Wow.
It is this good. Like, again, on screen, and he's running full speed, but then look how freaking high he is in the air. It's insane.
Yeah.
And he comes down with this, by the way. So
to be fair, what's full speed? To be fair, what's full speed for Jake Bobo, Clinton?
Well, in the rain, about a 4.6, right? In the pouring rain at UCLA. He's faster than he looks, right? So, but we won't be talking Bobo. We're actually not even talking Metcalf, who was a big part of that softy interview with Grubb and how he's going to be used. But we do have 4 other players lined up. Guys, let's try to keep it to about 5 minutes a person. I'll try and govern that as well. We're talking ceilings and floors, and we got a little bit of stats. It's the NFL. So, of course, gentlemen, we've got to start with the quarterback position. So we got some stats on the screen here, some beautiful graphics. Geno Smith, last year, just over 3,600 yards, just under 65% completion percentage, 20 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. He only played 15 games, got hurt in one of them as well. So he really was like 2.5 games out. The year before was quite a bit better, right? Over 4,000 yards. He had 30 touchdowns, and he was almost scratching 70% completion percentage. So they'd take some definite steps back. So I think this is the perfect one to kick it off, being like, we don't know what Grubb's going to bring. We have wildly different opinions of what's going to happen. And of course, that's going to impact the QB. So Mr. Phil, why don't we start with you? Give me your rundown of what do you think? Let's start with ceiling. Let's go big first. Geno Smith ceiling. Let's say we blow this thing out. Where do you think what can he achieve this year?
Well, Geno can achieve a lot. Michael Penix achieved a lot with Ryan Grubb, but everything I'm hearing from camp and the few things that I have seen, he is throwing the ball like Robin Hood throwing arrows at arrows that are already in bullseyes. It sounds like his accuracy, his release, everything about the way he's throwing is on top of the world right now. I don't see any reason to think that he can't. I'm not saying that he will, but that he can't have a ceiling where he absolutely tears it up throwing the ball. Like how Matt Ryan had that one year where it just seemed like everything worked and he was successful throughout. And maybe he never recreated that, but he had that one year. It's a chance. And like what Adam was saying, he could start off so hot with this offense. He could start out so hot that he just elevates the statistics early on. I think the ceiling can be quite high for him. I think he can have 2/3 of this in the first half of the season, 2/3 of what he had last year for a season. I think he can have it in the first half of the season. So let's go. Let's put him at like 4,800 yards is possible if he plays the whole season. Let's put him at 39 touchdowns is possible if he plays the whole season. Let's put him at, because we know he's done it. So his ceiling, 70% is very close to, I'm saying 69% I think is possible. With the receivers that he has, the potential is there. In fact, if his offensive line is average-ish to slightly above average in pass protection, which would be a lot to ask. That'd be a lot to ask. But if they're average-ish, I think there's a really good chance that he puts up those kind of numbers.
Well, in the Grubb interviews with Softy again, Grubb mentioned that they will do everything they got to do to protect, even if that means just against four down linemen rushing, or just a base defense coming at you, that they will keep 1 or 2 extra guys back
He keeps his
because
tight ends a lot. You might have noticed that, Adam. He keeps
yeah,
his tight end a lot to make sure the best pass rusher doesn't get there.
which is an interesting thing to re-sign Noah Fant. It makes the Farrell Brown signing a lot smarter, and bringing Westover as a UDFA potentially quite interesting. Okay, so those are some big lofty numbers, like 4,800, 39 touchdowns. Again, close to 70% if we're pushing the ball downfield as much as I think Grubb wants to. I get it's a ceiling. That's why it's a ceiling.
That's a hard one. Yeah, and I don't think that one. I think that's the least likely with this. But
I got you. So Adam, are those numbers a little way too lofty for you? Are they feeling like, no, man, we're talking ceiling. So if you're going to be a Bear, be a Grizzly.
Yeah, we're talking ceilings. So if we're talking ceilings, then we have to assume that, and I think we're talking even with floors, like the guys were relatively healthy, right? They maybe missed a game, 2.
Yeah. But
because everybody's floor is like,
correct.
I missed the entire season and didn't do squat, right?
Yeah,
Because
major injuries aside, because
right.
you can't predict them at all.
So we have to assume in ceilings that Ryan Grubb's offense is something that the league has never seen and they can't figure out for at the very least a year. And it goes gangbusters. And if that's the case with the way that he's talking, with what we saw at Washington, I don't see any reason why Geno doesn't end up with 4,800 yards was the number in my head, Phil, like in terms of yards, and having close to 40 touchdowns. And I think that his interceptions will also go up a little bit as well. I think he could end up closer to the 12 to 15 interceptions.
Sure.
And the completion percentage not matching his best year at 69.8, probably being a little bit lower, but still good because this is ceiling, right?
Yep.
Like 66% because of the vertical nature of this offense and the degree of difficulty of those throws against increased talent levels that this offense hasn't seen before in terms of Grubb running it in college. So a little decline in completion percentage from his best, way more in yards, way more in touchdowns, and a bit more in interceptions.
That feels possible. I won't say probable. Again, it's a ceiling. And a lot has to go right for that to click. The interesting part for me is when I go look at what Vegas is predicting for his yards, they have him at like 35 and change or something like that. They're expecting another decline in year 3, which is just interesting to me. Like, doesn't mean they're right. I think they are baking in the things we talked about in the first 10 minutes, that there's a lot we don't know. So, and that's where Vegas is putting that over under. So, and also when we start to define what a floor is, I don't mean floor, everything was the worst it possibly could be type floor. I mean, you talk about, like, it's a floor. It's like, you're not going below that. And that, whatever that means for you and your brains, but it's not everything went to crap. So, okay, what's the rock bottom we're talking about here? Let's go with hey, like, this guy, these players are all professionals. What's their professional floor on this team? Basically, Vegas is putting it at around 35, 50 for yards. So, Adam, starting with you, where do you think a floor is for Geno in some of these categories?
Yeah, it's probably okay. Let's look at last year. That was obviously the lesser of 2 years for Geno. I'd say he's probably around that 64% completion mark. There's no way in hell this guy throws for less than 3,700 yards this year in this type of offense.
I agree.
Think about just like Sam Howell last year in that Washington Commanders offense, which wasn't great. And he still put up huge numbers, right? Because you're throwing the heck out of the football. It inflates all those numbers. I'd say his floor is about what happened last year, only because the opportunities are going to be more, and the floor would occur if the offensive line plays similarly to the way that it did last year in terms of Geno, like, really being under duress more than the vast majority of quarterbacks in the league at a higher percentage. And, if that happens, probably be a little bit like this.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Mr. Phil, anything you'd add to that, or a different take you might have on what Geno's floor could be?
I have different takes in that what Geno's numbers end up looking like don't matter to me as much as far as how well the offense moves, how successful he is on third down, how successful we are on the red zone. I care about good quarterback play and the offense looking functional, not just functional, but dangerous. I feel like that a defense has to be on their A game to hold him off. Like, they really got to get after him. They really got to be handling things right to stop him. And if they give him a crevice, he's going to find it. That, to me, that's good quarterbacking. Does it show up in numbers? Yeah, it does a little bit. But obviously the O-line, the coordinator, a lot of that's connected to it. I also care a lot about him not getting sacked. You know, he can't control necessarily how many pressures he gets for the most part. A lot that's on his line. He's, you know, does line calls, but getting sacked is a quarterback stat. It's absolutely a quarterback stat. And if he's getting sacked like Sam Howell, I'm going to be upset. Quarterbacks that are not good at avoiding sacks, it doesn't matter how good their line is, what team they play for, they're always bad at it. Quarterbacks that are good at avoiding sacks, for instance, Rivers, they can have good lines, bad lines, they get rid of the ball. The pressures go up, the pressures go down, they avoid sacks. And I think Geno needs to show me again. His floor is he's not going to get sacked like Russell used to, and what I'd like to see for a floor is functional offense. If we're gonna, you guys are right on the yards. I think last year is probably similar. As far as if we're gonna go stats, with everything he has at his fingertips, there's no reason he should have worse stats than these next year. There wouldn't be an excuse for it without him something going terribly wrong. And I have no reason to think that Geno is just gonna stop being Geno. I don't see it.
I think so. After 2 years of being pretty darn consistent, and yes, the numbers fluctuated, but the play wasn't drastically different. There were certain things. We just talked about it in a Geno versus Tua show that's up on YouTube as well right now, where we went through a lot of things that did not go Geno's way, including the fact that the Seahawks were the only team to run under 1,000 offensive snaps last year. Yeah. And the major reason that happened was because the defense couldn't get off the friggin' field.
That's right.
So they didn't have the ball. They did not have the ball. And then third downs were, of course, a challenge. So I think we all agree that the floor is kind of what we're seeing here. Now, again, I love the idea that interceptions, that's the one area that absolutely can go up and probably will. And it's also not an indicator of something negative, because, again, if we climb to 35 or 38 touchdowns towards a ceiling and the interceptions creep up incrementally, I think it's a trade-off we'd all take, because that's just being so much more offensive success. All right. For the sake of getting to our next guy, we're going to talk about JSN next. Interesting rookie year. There's so much out there right now about how he was used or underserved and not really used in the Waldron offense. Kind of became a bubble machine, slot all the time, just a bunch of drag routes. And then when he did get outside, he actually had really good numbers when he worked the outside. It's just that they didn't let JSN out to play too much. Now with Grubb, I could definitely, again, interviews and everything else you've seen from the offense at UW and what he wants to do philosophically, I could see a large boom coming, and therefore a pretty nice ceiling rise for JSN. Let's see, Adam, I think we started with Phil last time on ceiling. So why don't you take away, where do you think JSN's ceiling is if things are clicking this year?
Ceiling for JSN for me, Clinton, like 110 receptions, 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns. I mean, he could be an absolute monster. I mean, this is what he was billed as when he was drafted and what everybody was expecting from him. He could have Nakua type numbers this next year. And it sounds like here in training camp, he's been doing very well and guys are excited. Also, too, you'd mentioned him being kind of relegated to Bubbleville last year. And I heard somebody rip out a stat on another show, and it was something like, of all the receivers with 100 reps, there was like 151 of them, and JSN was ranked 142 in terms of depth of target. Like terrible. Everything was short. Mm-hmm. I don't see any way that Grubb utilizes him in that way. It doesn't seem to be in his DNA. So he could have a massive breakout year. And this is me not being a hater. I didn't love this pick in the draft. I still don't quite understand what we were doing there. I wish we'd gone a little bit different way. But since everything has changed the way that it has, this could actually work out really well for Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I'm excited for him.
Mr. Phil, before I toss it to you, if that were to happen, just to kind of put some of the math in there. So if he were to get up to about 110 receptions, then you got to start playing the math out and say, okay, what does that mean? He needs probably like 140 targets or more. And why do I say or more? just on last year's reception to targets, he only caught about 67, 68%, right around 68%, a little over 2/3, which is okay, but not great. So if he's getting 140 targets, which is a huge jump, a really big jump, he's got to also increase his completion percentage to nearly 80, 78 to get to that 110 reception, floor there or ceiling. That could be difficult. So is Adam's ceiling pitching a little too high? Is it, a 12-foot ceiling and maybe you want to have a 10-foot ceiling? Where do you think you come in?
Yeah, the number of receptions is a lot, but I mean, we're talking ceiling.
We
I
are.
guess the way that I define this ceiling in my mind is we got a spray here. What's most likely is going to be in the 50% area. So
Right.
there's a 25% floor, 25% ceiling. To get over in this, is there a 25% chance he gets over 100 receptions? I think so. So I say the ceiling is over 100. I also have to say we need a criminal trial because Shane Waldron's usage of Jackson Smith in Jigba was absolutely atrocious. It was a travesty the way he was. When you look at how JSN was successful at Ohio State and he took all of that away and put him in positions to absolutely not utilize what he's great at, I cannot understand it. The more I think about it, the more frustrated I get on the misuse of him. Maybe it had a lot to do with the protections. I don't know what I have no idea what Shane was thinking for most of last season, the more that I think about it. But yeah, I think about over 100 is a nice ceiling for JSN. 110 to me is in like the 5% ceiling.
That's the apex of the ceiling. There's some vaulted ceilings potentially there. The area that I think could be super intriguing ceiling wise is this is the type of player, whereas Lockett continues to age as we all do. And I could see Grubb being like, hey, I really want to throttle JSN at the expense of just giving Lockett quite a bit less. It's got to come from somewhere. Yes, there should be more plays. We've covered that. Great. Still, it's still zero sum at the end of the day, but the area of touchdowns, he had 4 last year. He showed a penchant for the big play, game winner against the Browns, game winner against the Eagles, caught 2 others. That's an area where I think he could pitch to in the ceiling realm. He could be a 10 plus guy, especially if we're talking about a distribution of, well, Geno's 35 plus. If the ceiling's coming to fruition with Geno, well, then it cascades this way as well. And you start to think about where would that distribution be? Well, very likely then you talk about JSN somewhere 10 to 12 touchdowns, which, by the way, that'd be a heck of a sophomore year. I think we'd all be really, really pumped about that. So very, very cool. Okay, so floor-wise, do we think, again, is it as simple, and I don't want to say boring, but is it as like, well, what's on the screen really ought to be his floor, or is it even different than this? What do you think, Phil?
I think it should be. And going back to what you said, one of our receivers should get double-digit touchdowns, or this is a failure, I think.
At least one, I think. At least one.
Yeah,
we've done it before with DK. Yeah. DK and Tyler have done it where they've both gotten double digits, right? So
that's a floor for the receivers as a whole. Somebody should get 1. Probably they should get 2. But JSN, these stats last year, probably his freshman, his rookie season, I'd say that's his floor. And what was your other question? How are you trying to twist on that?
Well, just saying, like, is this the floor, or could it even be one? I don't want to put words in your mouth, so maybe I'll toss to Adam. Like, is this the floor that we're seeing on the screen last year, or could it flex one way or the other?
Yeah, I think his floor is higher than this that you see on the screen. Only because listen to the way that Grubb was talking about DK in that interview too, like the idea of how he's clearing people out and making space for everybody else and all that stuff. And I imagine that is something that will continue into the season in their scheme and how they want to do things. Also to the idea of Tyler, maybe he does get things throttled in terms of how many targets he gets. Also too, there's no guarantee that, Tyler stays healthy throughout a season, right? Like, I mean, we're kind of getting to that point to where you're like, okay, like every healthy season we get out of Tyler going forward is a bonus, a blessing. And JSN, young buck, probably going to be healthy for the whole year. So I think his floor is more like 70 receptions, I don't know, 800 yards and, 4 touchdowns again, let's say. Like, I think his floor is even higher than the way he was misused last year.
Yeah, and,
And I haven't
Mr.
heard.
Phil, that's what I was getting at too. Is I was wondering if we think the floor might even be higher than what was his ultimate rookie year, right? So, and I'm
More.
actually in that camp too. I think it'll rise just with the boats that are a more pass heavy offense and a coordinator who seemingly really wants to lean into this guy's skill set.
Yeah, more than likely. I would say Adams 110 is slightly more likely than JSN having 60 receptions or less. I think the
Right.
110 sounds really exciting to me and unlikely, but maybe a little bit more likely than him going under 60. I would also throw this out there. I don't know if I've heard this much. Maybe you guys have. I think Tyler might be a not third down specialist, but that's the only time we're going to know he's on the field is in big moments, third downs. I don't think we're going to know that if there's two receivers out there, Tyler's one of them anymore. I think there's going to be a lot more. Tyler is used in always in the most important moments, but not necessarily out there all the time like he always has been.
It'll be certainly interesting. I do think we're going to run a lot of 11 personnel, and I think there's going to be times where we got more Bobo, and Bobo's out there, and we have a fourth wide receiver, or they bring him in as kind of that pseudo extra tight end that obviously can catch and do some amazing things. So, all right, let us march on. We got two more to get through. So let's look at Ken Walker. This might be the most intriguing one. Another player where his 2022 stats were better than his 23. And on the screen, we could see that he had 219 attempts last year, 905 yards. He had 29 receptions, 9 total touchdowns, eight via the rush, 1 catching. He played 15 games. They put the asterisk on 15 because one of them, he really was in the game and got like 3 touches, got hurt, and was out. So he missed 3 full games essentially. So let's go the other way this time. We talked ceilings twice, 2 times in a row. We talked about what Grubb wants to do. There is Charbonnet. There is others out there. Halani, maybe McIntosh. We shall see who gets that third spot. What do we think is going to happen to K9 from a floor perspective? Phil, where would you start with K9 from a floor?
Okay, so I've often thought of Ken Walker this way this year. I know Adam would like him to be more of our thermostat, but I think he's going to end up being the thermometer. And what I mean by that is if the offense is humming, it's going to be one of those things where kind of like you might remember Barry Sanders could have some especially great games when the receivers were doing well on the run and shoot. We're not doing run and shoot, hallelujah for that. But if the attack gets humming with the pass, that's going to open up space for Walker to just tear things up. And so if Grubb accomplishes this thing that Adam doesn't want to see, which is a really good passing game, that's where Walker, I think, can really shine because I don't see him as Mr. Physical as much. Like he's going to make things happen physical, like Marshawn, Chris Carson. I see him as somebody that's going to take advantage of openings. And so, but deciding what's going to happen with the offense, that's really hard for me. So I think Walker could have a horrible season. I think the passing game could go bad, and then that makes it difficult for him. He could have an awesome season. I struggle to say how bad his season could be, but I'm afraid he could have a 750, 800 yard season, unfortunately, if things don't go right.
Yeah, interesting, and love to get Adam's take on this as well. So Adam, that's it. I'll bring you right in. Can it go lower than this? That's about, again, I was just trying to do the quick math on 219 attempts. He really only played 14 games. That's 15.6, less than 16 attempts per game. And we went over it last year. If you guys remember, we would do the 3 in, 3 outs and do the recap shows. Anytime the dude got like 18 or 20 touches, we pretty much won the game. And then when they were below, we didn't win those games very often. It was very, very just predictable that way. And yet his average was under 16 attempts per game for the 14 games he played. So I even made it a little bit better math-wise for him. So what do you think, dude? So is he going to be around there again, or can this go lower?
Yes and no. And the way that I'm going to say that is because, yes, the rushing numbers could go much lower. We could end up at about 150 attempts for like 600 to 700 yards, and that's about that because he's going to be throwing the heck out of the ball. And then not only that, but does Grubb really Bleav in like having kind of a bell cow back that you're putting out there down in, down out? Does he rotate in Sharps and McIntosh and, your undrafted boy there, Clinton? Like, okay, maybe. It's hard to know how he's going to want to utilize that, but I do think that the floor is higher in receptions. I think he's probably going to be for a floor, like, I don't know, probably around where he was this year in receptions. So that was, let's see, 37 targets, 29 receptions. I'd say his floor in receptions is I don't know, 40.
And that'd be a nice jump. Not that 40 is a giant number for a running back, but statistically, that's a large jump for him if he does get that as a floor, which is interesting and certainly piques my interest in the sense of, well, then what do you think the ceiling is, Adam? And is it balanced, that ceiling, or is it overloaded to one area for you?
What was A-Chain's or Mostart's stats down there in Miami this last year? Like, or if you even combined them, or however you want to look at that position group for the Dolphins.
I'd have to look. They were huge. I know that. And, HN missed a bunch of time too. They faded as the year went on, but HN got like a bad, they got dinged up, right? So it got hurt, but their per game average when they were healthy, or when at least one of them was healthy, let's put it that way, it was super. It was really, really high, right? They were crushing it. So.
Right. So I'd say 90% of whatever one of those two dudes' stats were. And really, you can talk about injuries for the Dolphins going down the stretch. The problem for the Dolphins going down the stretch is they played fair weather football. And when things get colder and the weather gets worse and you have to play outdoors and go on the road, that sort of offense traditionally has not fared well. And that's why it kind of faded down the stretch. So that's the ceiling to me, is some version of that,
which is pretty darn high, which could be, and hopefully doesn't fade into the dark, into the night there, into the good night. So Phil, for you, could it be balanced? What does a ceiling look like? Is it Grubb actually does stick with and achieve a great running game? Is it more pass heavy? What does it feel like for you?
Oh, I think he can get a lot of all-purpose, if you combine his receiving and rushing yards, he's going to have a lot of big plays next year. If the offense gets going well, we are going to see some really cool highlights from Ken Walker. And I think we can get 1,700 yards receiving and rushing combined. I mean, McCaffrey led the league with 1,459 rushing. So, I mean, getting 1,400 yards is crazy for a running back anymore, just the way football goes. Nobody plays running back more than 14, 15 games for the season. That's just normal. That's what's going to happen. But if he can get 90 yards a game rushing, that's a huge year. 1,300 yards over that. That would be, I'd say, a ceiling that might be in like the 15%, 10% it could happen. But if the offense is humming, he's gonna rock, and he's gonna get some receiving yards, some rushing yards, some great highlights. We're gonna love it. That's just what I don't know if it's gonna happen or not. If Geno has a good year, I say Ken's having a good year.
They probably do. They probably are connected that way. I think the area for me that could be the highest ceiling, and we hinted at it, I just think, is that reception mark. And again, back to the Grubb interview, there's a reason we prefaced it before we did these, because Grubb talked about it. He's like, look, we want to keep K9 on the field on third downs. Yeah. So we're going to work on him getting better at blocking, because then he becomes the outlet receiver and the dump off, and you get that dude in space. Guys, we've seen it happen to our team for a decade now, right? The guy leaks out of the backfield, and a little dude, whoever it might be, gets it in space, and then whatever, we had tackling issues for the last few years as well, and they're converting on these like 3rd and 11s, and we're basically throwing our soda pops at the fridge in frustration. We saw it way too much. Now it would be kind of cool in that way if K9 could pitch to, say, 50 receptions. I don't see why it's not achievable as a ceiling. And if that happens and he becomes more of like I wouldn't want to say a Ricky Waters, because Waters was so
Roger
much West
Craig.
Coast. Yeah, more like Roger Craig, right? That would be interesting. That'd be a cool turn of events for him, and getting him touches in more space, I think, equates to a lot more offense. So that'd be super cool. All right, we got good, Phil.
This is such a positive for me. That's, of all the things Grubb said, it is possible that it's positive. And here's why. As a fan, what happened? How do you feel when Christian McCaffrey's taken off the field? I'm like, yes, this is going to be a lot easier. And anytime, I mean, Ken Walker is the best playmaker, one of the best playmakers on the team. He goes off the field, we are less dynamic. And so if it does work out that he's our first and third down back, I kind of love that possibility because he's so dangerous out there. They have to keep an eye on him. So I'm not saying I love this idea, but it's possible it can be awesome because anytime Waters was off the field when we had him, we were worse. Roger Craig's out the field, they're worse. When the really skilled playmaker comes off the field, the defense goes, we just have to worry about, pick whoever our third down back has been the past 5 years, and you just aren't that excited.
Yeah, I don't know about that one, Phil. Look, Christian McCaffrey is the engine of the San Francisco 49ers defense. Like, he is the most important player. There's no two ways about it. And
That's
Shanahan runs the holy hell out of the football, and he's the focus. Ken Walker is never going to be that in this offense based on what we've been told, what we've been hearing, and what we've seen from Ryan Grubb's pass. I don't think that there's any way that Ken Walker is going to have that kind of impact given the circumstances of being that dude that you're like, whew, oh, he's finally off the field. Be like, all right, another back in. He's probably just going to go out to the flat and catch football anyway. Who cares if it's Sharps or Ken Walker? I don't think that it's really going to be that big of a deal to a defense one way or the other.
I just think Ken's that much better than anybody else in our running back stable. To me, he's twice the playmaker of the rest of them.
I'm more on the Phil side that I think he is definitely a more dynamic player. There is a tug to the Adam side for me as well. That's like, well, sure, but again, proof is in the pudding. What will Grubb do? And he has certainly made it clear that he is definitely about that wide receiver life. He is not being shy about that, right? So he's basically being like, hey, I've got the 3 dogs I had at UW, and we're going to try something similar. With all that said, where does that leave our last person, right? So Noah Fant, to me, this was an intriguing, and I did not love the re-signing. When we first made the trade, I was all about this part of the Rush trade. I thought this might be the most brilliant part of the Rush trade. Other things worked out better, Spoon and others, the draft picks, the money, et cetera, Geno's contract, that all kind of came up Millhouse. The Noah Fant part really was kind of like, meh. And when I went back and looked at his stats last year, guys, I was actually surprised. He played all 17 games. He put up a goose egg for touchdowns. I know he got tackled at the half-yard line on Monday Night Football versus the Giants because I had Noah Fant to score a touchdown on PNW Prop Stars, so that was awesome. But 32 receptions, 43 targets, just over 400 yards, no touchdowns. Kind of paltry. So again, let's look at ceiling. We talked about wide receivers. We talked about outlets to Ken Walker. Are there any balls left to go around to what is a skilled pass catching tight end? Adam, what's his? Let's go back to ceiling. What do you think?
Most yards he's ever had in a season is 673 with 62 receptions. I don't even think he makes that. I think it's probably closer to, I don't know, 50 receptions and 500 yards, similar to his first year in Seattle. A couple things. You talked about Ryan Grubb's all about that wide receiver life. Yeah. Yeah, he is. One thing I have not heard him talk about in any way, shape, or form in any of his press conferences since he's been the hire as the offensive coordinators is tight ends. I've heard one thing come out of his mouth. Like, maybe he said one or two things, but he doesn't talk about tight ends. And then you mentioned in that interview as well, Clinton, him being a guy that's willing to keep dudes in to help with the pass protection if he feels like the offensive line isn't getting it done. He mentioned the offensive line was already giving up pressure inside, and that was a problem. And so I think he's probably going to have to keep dudes inside a little more often than he would like. And what he would like is a lot. He likes doing it a ton. It was something like 38% of the time when 4 rushers were brought while he was at Washington, he kept a dude in. I expect those numbers to stay the same. And it's not like the other tight end is going to stay in, because there's never going to be 2 tight ends on the field. It's almost always going to be 3, 4, 5 wide. So poor Noah Fant, I think he's wandered into a situation here that once again isn't going to be able to show off his big physical upside.
Yeah, so a little short ceiling for Fant is what Adam's feeling there, Mr. Phil. Are we talking more Pharaoh Brown then? Because we will be keeping a dude in to block and to make sure Geno stays upright. And guess what? Pharaoh Brown is not Noah Fant, so he cannot get stats when he's on the sideline. So Phil, what is Fant's ceiling in your eyes?
I got good news, bad news, good news. Good news for Fant. He's making good money this year. So good news for Fant that way. Bad news, I think the only way he's going over 50 catches is if he tricks them into thinking he's a wide receiver. And so that he goes in for one of the plays where he's actually doing wide receiver routes, because I've never seen Grubb make a tight end be a feature for catching balls on his offense. And though Noah has really good skills for after the catch, he's pretty good at catching, he's pretty good at getting open, very good at running. I haven't seen it yet. So if it happens, it'll be great. It'll be a big surprise. Here's the good news for fans, though. The good news for fans is, of all the players we've talked about, this one matters the least. So what he does for ceiling or floor is going to have the least impact on our season outcome.
Fair on that part. I'd say the ceiling for him that might be most impactful for us might just be touchdowns. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he ends up with 4 to 6 touchdowns. He just becomes like a red zone darling and there's something working there, right? That's a plausible outcome. That absolutely could happen. And again, if we're talking about Geno pitching 38, 35 touchdowns, well, then I expect Noah Fant to get certainly more than 0. So that part could be where it's like, oh yeah, his receptions weren't huge, targets and everything else still not that big, but maybe he chips in a bit more and scores more in the red zone, which would be great for us fans, right?
What's the most touchdowns he's ever had in his career?
I will look that up. I'll look that up as we head on. But go ahead, Adam.
4 in any given season. He's had 4 twice, his last year in Denver and his first year in Seattle.
Okay. So, if maybe he gets back 3 or 4, maybe 5, and that's where he could have the impact. I think we kind of covered the floor, guys. I mean, we could talk about it a bit more, but we certainly talked about it a lot. I mean, the recipe for a floor here is, for me, it goes through the fact that he might not be on the field that much. If they want a dude to be in there on third down and make sure Geno Smith stays upright, well, guess what? It's probably not Noah Fant. It's probably Pharaoh Brown. He's just a better blocker. And
didn't we pay him after we hired Grubb? Didn't we pay Fant after we hired Grubb, or was it before?
I forget which way it went. I just know it's, he's making quite a bit of money now. Hey, could we be wrong? Could he blow it out? And there's just so many, it's bountiful. There's so many passes to go around, maybe, but you got to feed a 3-headed monster at wide receiver. They are going to throw the ball to running backs more than they did last year. They have other dudes who might make the team, like a Westover, like an H-back style guy that might make the team. How many balls could Noah Fant actually get? So I think this is one of the occasions where the floor that we're seeing on screen, besides touchdowns, because you can't get negative touchdowns, I think those all could go down. I think he could be looking at 25, 20. Yeah, he could be 25 or 27 receptions is a possibility, because
how low can you go?
Which would be interesting. It certainly would not be a great use of resources if that's how that goes. But at the end of the day, Phil, like you said, he is, of the 4 players, I think the least important of the 4. So, well, guys, I know we went a little over on what we wanted to cover per dude. Glad we had the time. I'll just end it with this graphic on screen here as well, which is Bobo. Again, this guy's going to get he's going to earn some balls his way as well. So as we wrap it up, Adam, any final thoughts on this floor versus ceiling episode?
Yeah, Jake Bobo's ceiling is he earns a Hall of Fame nod in just this one season. Like, that's his ceiling. But yeah, man, if you guys found value in this content at all, which is, kind of all over the map, we all have different opinions on it and all of that. Hopefully it's something different than what you've been hearing on every other show. If you find value in that, hit the like button. That'd be cool. We appreciate that. We like being liked. That feels nice. If you like it more than just liking it, then hit the subscribe ski button. We'd appreciate that too. And I know it's annoying, but thank you so much for sticking with us. And I think with that, boys,
there's only one thing left to say.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Go
Share
Hawks.
it with your friends. Share it with your friends, please.